Hey, welcome back to Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities. Very full day, giving advice, talking with the authors of Prodigal Christianity, and now have the privilege of giving a call to my friend and Victoria's friend. You get to call Richard your friend as well?
Him. I'd love to have him be
Richard
my
Rohr,
friend.
he's the author of the book called Immortal Diamond, and really look forward to having him on the air. Don't you love it that we just make calls and they like ring just like that, and you get to hear the whole thing, you get to hear the ringing?
It's just magic.
I love that as a part of the show.
It's magical.
Richard speaking.
Hi, Richard. Doug Pagitt here.
Yes,
Hi,
Doug.
Richard.
Hey, and we're joined on the air here with Victoria Lynn. She's a sidekick on the show.
Hi.
Okay. Hello, Victoria.
Hi.
Richard, thanks so much again for being on the show and for your book, Immortal Diamond. It's fantastic. Congratulations.
No, you're very kind, but thank you. Thank you.
In the book, in the subtitle, you talk about this search for your true self, and
Right.
and I know that in some ways the book is a continuation of your most recent book on Falling Upward, about spirituality and life for someone in the second half of life.
Right.
Talk a little bit about what you're getting at with this search for your true self in spirituality.
Well, this is one reason for all of the weaknesses of religion why I can't give up on religion. Because healthy religion, and I do mean healthy, is the only group prepared to point you to what I mean by your true self. In other words, your objective, metaphysical, eternal, soulful identity in God. Now, that's religious language, I admit. But if you have anything less than that, all you have is your psychological self, your temperamental self, your self-created self, which are all fine and wonderful, but they're constantly changing. You see, they're constantly being reconfigured from a different vantage point, at a different level, and that's okay. But you need a foundation and ground, and that's what healthy religion was prepared to give humanity, that you are something eternal in God, and that doesn't come and go, and that doesn't change.
So, Richard, it's interesting because when I've read your comments on this, which are so helpful, I find myself feeling like, and maybe this is what people in their mid-40s do. And I've been thinking a lot about religion, and I have wanted to move from sort of a sensibility of like an esoteric Doug into a Doug that's in this real world in real ways, and I'm truly shaped by the life of God in the here and now, and the people I'm with, and the family I'm a part of, and the land that I live on, and the social structures I'm in. I've wanted those to be more real for the life of God in me, and not let that drift away into sort of I'm just in a container, and the real me doesn't get to shine through here. So talk a little bit about someone like me who's got to find myself wanting to ground myself right in this world in a certain way. Now being encouraged to say, well, the work you do and the way you socially construct yourself, that's not your true self.
Well, just so you remember that I'm not saying the so-called false self, the concocted, constructed self, I'm not saying it's bad. It is necessary. It's the doorway into the experience of your true self. In other words, you have to take your job seriously. You have to take your reputation, your roles, your offices seriously. And that's when you see through them, if I could, that they're wonderful, they're good, but they're not yet it.
Yes.
So I wouldn't want to take you from any, you described beautifully, an incarnational spirituality, as I would call it. Taking this world, this life seriously. And this is going to be a paradox, but those of us who take it seriously are precisely the same ones who see that it's not everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well,
and
by taking it seriously, you see through it and beyond it, while still including it.
How have you found people are able to recognize when it's the true self that they've gotten to, and not another psychological
another construct
or psychological version of themselves?
Where
they've said,
there's
okay,
a
I'm good
kind of
here.
freedom to it, a kind of non-urgency, a kind of rest, a kind of, which we'd normally use the word peace, I suppose. It's not frantic. It's not, there's no place yet to go, so it's settled. And most people would say, I feel peaceful. I don't feel there's some goal out in front of me that I still have to achieve. So that's why I've often said the most common verb used by the mystics is the verb rest. The true self gives you a sense of rest. It's all right here, right now. It's okay. Now, that doesn't mean you still don't want to grow and improve and do better and love more. Of course you do, probably more than ever. But what's taken away is the frenetic anxiety that most of us live with. Got to do this, got to do that. All the gotta do's sort of have less urgency to them.
And you have written that this sense of yourself, this living with yourself, discovering yourself, is really deeply connected to our understanding of love. Like somehow love is on the side of this, and the battle or the fight or the frantic life seems to be something else.
That's very well put. I'm glad you read that in the text, because people could slough that off as just some pious words. But the true self is love. And I don't mean that just as poetry.
Yeah.
If God is love and the true self is you united to God at the deepest level, then the true self is also a discovery of love at the deepest level, but not psychological love. And what I mean by that is, or romantic love. It's not my ability to be more loving. It's more metaphysical, foundational than that the universe itself is okay, is good, is on my side, is benevolent, is generous, is abundant. That's what allows you to rest, that there's this foundational okayness. Yeah. And that's the peace and the joy you see in people who are united with God.
And you do a good job of describing in your book, Immortal Diamond, that people have been pursuing this and suggesting answers to this over the centuries in different times. And I know that those conversations have had different partners, where there's been more corresponding cultural conversations about it, poets and religions, and then times there's been frustration. And one of the popular cultural religious touchstones in our society, because of Hollywood type of the people who are in Hollywood and have certain reputations, Tom Cruise and these types, they get into this, like Scientology kinds of stuff and Christian Science, which starts to say, hey, everything we're experiencing isn't the real deal. There's this other real deal, and that's what you need to care about. Do you think about, do you worry that sometimes this conversation that's been so deep and so meaningful for people gets pushed in different directions because of kind of a popular religious and psychological notion of this pursuit of the true self? Do you think about that at all?
And I don't mean to be negative or critical, but in things like The Secret, that they will say sort of what I'm saying.
Right.
But
it
if you draw
very similar
close to it, there's no philosophical foundation for believing it. Or experiencing it. It's still psychological. And again, I'm not against psychology. I'm very psychological myself. But what I mean when I say psychological, it's still a construct of your belief system. Got it? It's still, you work up to it by reading the book The Secret, or whatever the book might be.
Sure.
So, a lot of New Age thinking, which has contributed many good things. I'm not here to dismiss it. But it usually has not laid any foundation from the perennial tradition for why this has been consistently rediscovered by the saints and the mystics and the scriptures. It's their discovery now in the 20th century. And the fact that they feel no need to align that with the perennial tradition, I'm afraid that makes it suspect. that it's still a new idea out of California. Do you
I
understand?
got you. Yes. No, and I've wondered about that. Or, L. Ron Hubbard sort of whipped this up in the, in the 50s. Or
there
Mary
you go.
Baker Eddy. Yeah, so I've wondered about that, how someone who's moves in the world of being a spiritual teacher like you do and wants to talk not just about Christianity, but that Christianity is a lens through which you can access a greater spirituality and the fullness of what God has for people and for humanity. If you feel sometimes that gets interfered with at certain times by different popular conversations.
Yeah, it does get interfered with, but in a deference to it, I'm also going to say that sometimes the language from the outside makes us aware of how we're not teaching our own message very well.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah. The Course in Miracles did that, for example, with the whole issue of healing. That we said, well, we're supposed to believe in healing, but, we don't talk about it very much ourselves, or forgiveness, or the recovery movement. They all are discovered, but rediscovered, but neglected parts of the gospel. And I'm not saying that they're not true. I'm saying they're very true. But we haven't taught a lot of aspects of the gospel very well, in my opinion. We've just mouthed doctrines and dogmas, which became cliches very often.
And it seems to me that another one of the cultural touch points for certain Christians is a Christianity that says it's not about you. Right, one of the best-selling.
That's one of my big lines.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So how do you connect together the notion of, hey, people, it's not all about you, with the search for your true self? Those feel like, there's these two are living together somehow. How do you see that?
Yeah, I what you're saying when you say that, and I use that line a lot myself, is what I think has eviscerated Western Christianity so much, and that is individualism, that we do think it's all about us. The wonderful thing of the discovery of the true self is it's simultaneously a discovery of the participatory self, or the shared self, or as Paul would say, the body of Christ. That the true self is not just me. The true self is who I am in Christ, a hand, a foot, an ear, an eye, as Paul puts it. And we've just got into this private journey to heaven by moral behavior thing, and it never gets you to the mystical, which is the mature level of Christianity. So I thank you for seeing that. That's exactly right.
Richard, I want to ask you also, because you're my Franciscan friend, and this has been a big week, a big month for Catholics, with a new pope, and then for the Franciscans. So, could you give just for people who don't know all the intricacies of how the Catholic Church is organized, that you're a priest, you're a Catholic priest, but you're a Catholic priest as a part of the Franciscan order.
That's right.
And Pope Francis took the name of Francis, which is where Franciscans get their name. Do I have that part right?
That's right.
Okay.
From Francis of Assisi in the 13th century. So it astounded the whole world. And we recognize that the irony of no pope ever having chosen that name.
Boy, isn't that
because
something?
In so many ways, Francis is a countercultural figure. He's not a churchman.
Yeah. Everybody feels like Francis is on their side,
Yeah. And so we're living these days in great excitement and great hope that this man might really be a reformer, but enough of an insider that he got himself elected, God bless him. I wonder if the cardinals recognize what they did, because all the signals he's put out in the first week is that he's going to be an outsider insider. And that's the only way you can reform anything. So we're very grateful as Franciscans that he chose the name of our founder, and the omens are very good.
Was there anybody nervous in the Franciscan community that was like, "Hey, that guy can't take our name"? Like what if he?
I think quite the contrary.
Okay, good.
We were just overjoyed that he has brought Francis to new awareness, and I'm told that even the sale of biographies of Francis has just shot up in the last few days because people are saying, "Who is this figure?"
Yeah.
So it's very
then that
exciting.
makes me...
I don't know if you know this or if it's even of interest, but a librarian at the Library of Congress told me once that the longest single bibliography in the Library of Congress is Francis of Assisi.
Really?
Anybody who's lived in history. No one has been written about, has as many studies, monographs, biographies as Francis of Assisi.
Well, then that raises the question I have to ask Richard Rohr. Are you going to write a book about St. Francis of Assisi?
Well, you know, he's implied or quoted in almost all of my books.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Is he going to get a title?
I probably won't write a whole book. Many others have done it better.
So why is it, Richard, that you think other pontiffs haven't taken that name in all of these? I mean, I was surprised. Everybody even news people, who are like, wow, it's the first like you just sort of assumed there was a Pope Francis. Like
there must have been a dozen of them. Yeah. Well, I think it's what I said before, that he's not a churchman. He wasn't even a priest. And I think by and large, people who became popes were people who were churchmen. You don't become a bishop without wanting to on some level.
I see.
And so when you got to the top, so-called, you chose the name of a dignified ecclesiastical saint or a former pope. So you're absolutely right. The choice of his name is revolutionary.
Well, okay, so, and I know that you've written that as a Franciscan, and I think this comes up at this time of the year, being Easter, that people start thinking about the whole Christian story through the lens of the Passion Week and the death of Jesus and the resurrection. And you have written that, and I'm going to quote you if that's okay, that as a Franciscan, you don't see Jesus as a part of changing God's mind about humanity, but you say, for us as a Franciscan, Jesus didn't come to change the mind of God about humanity, but to change the mind of humanity about God. Jesus' death was not solving a cosmic problem whatsoever, but revealing to us our own human problem, that we fear and we kill what we should love.
Yes. Thank you for noticing that. We were always inside the Catholic Church, which outsiders probably have no reason to know. Most Catholics don't even know it. In the 13th century, the Franciscans and Dominicans were the big debating society. We usually lost the debates back then because the Dominicans were the smart boys.
Oh, I see.
We were the lower class boys who worked with the poor. But again and again, I can say without bragging, most of the Franciscan opinions which were like minority opinions from the Supreme Court. You don't throw them out, but they're still registered as not the winning case. That was the case with the doctrine of the atonement. That we Franciscans always said Jesus was not solving any problem. The Christ was the first idea in the mind of God, and everything was created in the image of God, as Colossians and Ephesians say very clearly in the first chapter. So Jesus didn't come along to spill blood, to talk God into loving us, which is the way most Christians think.
Yes, right. It's taught.
And we never thought that way. And yet we were never declared unorthodox, that our perspective was the Christ was the first idea in the mind of God. In other words, the template, the model to put together matter and spirit as one, starting with the Big Bang. Now that became personified in Jesus of Nazareth. I would be a believer, of course, but Jesus came along 2,000 years ago. The Christ existed from all eternity. And that's a different way of thinking for most people. But it was the Franciscan school that taught that.
How when in your own biography, when you were thinking about entering the priesthood, does one make a decision about what order they're going to be in, the Dominicans or the Jesuits or the Franciscans?
Sure, yeah. Now, to be honest, very often it was the first priest you met or the priest who worked in your parish.
Really?
So sometimes that motivation was not really clear from the beginning.
It's like a kid saying, I'm a Ford guy because my dad was a Ford guy?
Yeah, there you go. That's right. But still, for many of us, like I read A Life of St. Francis when I was a young man, and who would read A Life of St. Francis and not say, gosh, I'd like to be like him? And that was certainly true in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, the book is a great contribution. I'm not going to call it a spiritual classic yet, because we'll do that. You know.
I hope not.
But it very well could become one. Immortal Diamond, The Search for the True Self. And
the title comes from a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
right.
Yeah. Our
That's
literature
right.
expert here has noticed
A
something.
Jesuit.
Do you want to
Jesuit.
do you want to tell us anything about the title Immortal Diamond and why that poem was inspiring for you?
Well, it almost was the perfect metaphor. Once the idea of wanting to clarify this came to me, that poem was just sitting there in the middle of my memory. And I went back to it, and you see the long title to the whole poem even ends with the comfort of the resurrection. And he sees the immortal diamond as his metaphor for the soul, for the value of the self, the true self. He first uses adjectives to describe our brokenness, poor, potsherd, weak, earthy, and yet still immortal diamond. So I was glad to use that as the frontispiece of the book. Thank you for noticing it.
Well, that is fantastic. Richard, thank you for all that you do and for the book Immortal Diamond and for being on the show today.
Delight to talk to both of you. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Buddy.
Take care, Richard.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.